So you want to buy an airport. Most people hear that and think billions of dollars. Sometimes it is billions. London's Heathrow sold in 2024 for £8.7 billion, and Singapore's Changi or Dubai's airport would cost even more. But that's only the very top of the market. Last year, a small regional airport in Gloucestershire, England went up for sale starting at £25 million, and a buyer took it within a week, full runway, terminal, and operating license included. In the US, there are private airfields scattered across Texas, that's Florida, and Montana that you can buy outright for $500,000. So the price depends entirely on where you're looking. But if you actually want to make a fortune from this, that's you move like the institutions do, because an airport isn't a piece of infrastructure. It's a monopoly on a specific piece of geography. And that's exactly where this story gets interesting. Not long ago, the Spanish infrastructure company Ferrovial sold its stake in Heathrow. The buyers were private equity firms and sovereign wealth funds from Qatar, Singapore, Saudi Arabia. Why? Because London has no other Heathrow. Everyone who flies through that city passes through the exact same doors. And it's right behind those doors that the real business begins, which means the future owner needs to understand precisely how this business actually makes its money. Officially, an airport earns in two ways. Unofficially, in three. We'll get to the third one. The first official channel is aeronautical revenue. Airlines pay for landing, parking, and gate access. Passengers pay a fee that's already baked into their ticket price, up to $4. 50 per person in the US, add it all up globally, and the world's airports collected roughly $15 billion in aeronautical revenue last year. Landing fees, gate charges, passenger fees combined. That sounds like a serious number. It is. But it isn't even enough to cover most airports' expenses, which is exactly why the majority of an airport's profit comes from somewhere else entirely. Airports pull 37% of their revenue from shops, parking, rentals, and advertising. In cities like Dubai or Istanbul, it's over half. Picture a shopping mall where the customers physically cannot leave, have 3 hours of free time, money in their pocket, and nothing better to do. So that's the highest purchasing power captive audience in the entire country. And the airport doesn't sell them anything itself. It just leases the retail space, taking a fixed minimum rent plus a cut of turnover. In 2024, Spain's airport operator AENA launched the world's largest duty-free tender. 27 airports, an expected 18 billion euros air turnover over 12 years, just for the right to sell perfume and chocolate to people waiting for a flight. Parking is the second biggest stream. Airports earn $12 to $13 billion a year from it globally. A week of parking at JFK runs about $245. Near the terminal at Paris Charles de Gaulle, close to $265. Multiply that across 10,000 constantly occupied spaces, and it adds up fast. Then there's the money that flows in from companies that serve the airport, not the other way around. Luggage cart operators can pay the airport up to 50% of their rental revenue just for the right to operate there. Uber and Lyft pay a pickup fee on every single ride. $2.50 at smaller US airports, but Los Angeles International pushed that to $12 per pickup at the main terminal, a single change expected to bring in roughly $100 million a year. Add baggage wrapping, sleeping pods, ATM contracts, dozens of smaller lines. And together they generate billions for the world's largest airports. Building the runways and the terminals is only half the equation. The other half is what it costs to run all of it, every single day. An airport handling 50 million passengers a year spends north of $1 billion annually just on operations, about $20 per passenger. At major hubs like Atlanta or Los Angeles, that drops closer to $15. Because scale spreads the fixed costs out. At small regional airports, it climbs to $30 or $50 per person, and at the very smallest, over $100, because the fixed costs stay exactly the same no matter how few people walk through. Labor is the single biggest line. At Los Angeles International in 2025, salaries and compensation alone ran about $500 million, with tens of millions more in contracted services and utilities. Energy is its own giant expense. A large airport can consume as much electricity as a city of 60,000 people. JFK spent more than $80 million on power and heating in 2025 alone. And at Heathrow, insurance ran roughly £20 million, with operating costs beyond that adding several hundred million more. The cost of staying open, staffed, powered, and ready, whether the planes are full or not. That last part is the whole problem, and COVID-19 proved it. US. Airports lost $40 billion over 2 years of the pandemic. Global aviation lost $84 billion in 2020 alone, and airports kept spending almost exactly what they spent in a normal year. You cannot pause an airport. The runway has to stay operational. Air traffic controllers and staff have to stay on duty. Every system has to stay ready. whether 2,000 people walk through the terminal that day or 200,000. That's why, in a crisis, airport owners have to be prepared to spend far more than they earn, and it's a big part of why every major airport quietly runs a third revenue channel. Not exactly official, the most visible piece of that shadow economy is lost luggage. In the US, 5% of checked bags reach their owner. Remaining 0.5% feeds a system American Airlines set up back in 1970, a 50,000 square foot store in Scottsboro, Alabama, that buys unclaimed luggage in bulk and resells the contents. Over the decades, everything from a suit of knight's armor to a $60,000 Rolex. Anything left at security, knives, liquids, as forgotten watches, gets sold off through a government auction site instead of the trash. But the real money in this shadow economy comes from somewhere sharper. At Las Vegas's Harry Reid International, the airport authority asked a simple question. If millions of people are flying in to gamble, why wait for them to reach a taxi? Today, there are 4,400 slot machines in that airport, run by a private concessionaire that pays the airport its share as the landlord. The other angle is scarcity itself. Every landing and takeoff at a major airport occupies what the industry calls a slot pair, a fixed window of time. Heathrow is capped at roughly 10,500 of these a week. If an airline uses a slot at least 80% of the time, it keeps it next season. If not, it goes back into the pool. But a 1999 British court ruling opened a loophole. Airlines can legally sell, lease, or swap slots with each other, and neither the airport nor the regulator gets a cut. The largest known deal saw Kenya Airways sell a single morning slot at Heathrow to Oman Air for $75 million in 2016. The airport earns nothing directly from that trade, but the indirect value is enormous. That's because it hands the airport its best argument for the next fight. That argument goes straight to the regulator. Airlines are paying tens of millions of dollars just for the right to use our runway at the right time, which proves demand exceeds capacity. So give us the right to raise the passenger fee. In April 2026, the UK regulator settled a multi-year fight over exactly that at Heathrow. The airport wanted to raise its passenger charge to £33 to fund a £6 billion modernization plan. The regulator approved £28. That's 80 instead, lower than Heathrow wanted, higher than the airlines were pushing for. Multiplied across roughly 84 million annual passengers. Even that modest increase adds tens of millions of dollars in extra revenue every year. So let's run the real math on 3 realistic versions of your airport. A typical small regional airport handling about 100,000 passengers a year costs $30 to $50 million. Revenue sits around $10 million. Operating costs run $10 to $12 million for staffing, certification, and security. The net result is usually near zero, sometimes a small loss. Nobody buys this tier for cash flow. You're buying the land, the license, and the bet that the city eventually grows toward your runway. That's a mid-size hub handling 30 million passengers. Think Manchester or San Diego, puts you in the $4 billion range, with revenue around $1 billion, operating costs near $750 million, and net profit landing around $250 million a year. A major international hub above 80 million passengers can generate up to $5 billion in revenue against $3.5 to $4 billion in operating costs. Profit landing somewhere between $600 million and $1 billion a year, depending entirely on whether the regulator finally approves the passenger fee increase you've been requesting for 3 straight years. At that scale, nobody buys the whole airport. You buy a slice of it, and a slice of Heathrow can out-earn an entire small airport you own outright. By now, the business is obvious. An airport isn't transportation infrastructure. It's a monopoly on access to people at the exact moment they physically cannot leave. The planes are just the excuse that gathers them there. Everything else is monetizing that one single fact. The person is already inside. They have 3 hours to kill, money in their pocket, and the only way out runs straight through your terminal. Airlines are just the traffic provider. They pay the airport to land, and in doing so, they deliver the very passengers the airport is about to make money from twice. It might be the only business in the world that profits from its customers and from the intermediaries who bring those customers in. That's exactly why sovereign wealth funds buy stakes in Heathrow, not in British Airways. Airlines compete, go bankrupt, merge, disappear. The airport is the only one that stays exactly where it is.